What's going on, everybody? It is that time again. The Sooners Illustrated Podcast, episode 166.
166.
On this Monday, April 14th, 2025. Josh Callaway, James D. Jackson, Tom Green with you on a Monday. Spring camp in the rearview mirror. We wrapped it up on Saturday with the Crimson Combine. We were all there. We heard from Brent Venables, Ben Arbuckle, a couple more coaches, bunch of players. We're going to wrap it all up, and we'll also wrap up the spring. What did we learn here on the show today? Of course, we'll also talk about a little basketball transfer portal stuff, a big splash made last week by Porter Moser and that staff, and we'll recap the weekends that were for the Diamond Sports. So a lot to get to on a Monday. So without further delay, let's get into the football side of it. Spring camp is over, guys. The Crimson Combine was on Saturday. We were all there. We'll start there before we go big picture on kind of spring camp as a whole. Takeaways, if any, from the Crimson Combine. James and I did an instant reaction, on the field on Saturday. So we kind of talked a little bit about some guys that, kind of stood out. It was hard to know what to make of it. It was basically a practice, even kind of less so than a practice because it was like a half-speed practice.
Mm-hmm.
What were the takeaways, Tom? You can start us off since James and I have had our cracks at it. Anything that you came out of Saturday feeling like you learned from an on-field perspective, or I guess post-game too, if you want to get into that, you can also.
Yeah, I mean, on field, it's kind of been a lot of what we've seen when we've been out there at practice, just in terms of, the starting unit has been what we've kind of seen throughout the spring, especially like along the offensive line, defensive line, in the secondary, all over. The only thing that really changed was wide receiver, because they held some guys back just with minor injuries.
Sure.
Obviously, Isaiah Satania wasn't out there. Keontae Lewis wasn't out there. The Javonte Gibson injury, certainly. The running back pecking order changed a little bit just from what we've seen during, regular, individual position drills. Xavier Robinson was out there getting a lot of work with the ones on Saturday. But overall, like just from a big picture, like what this event was type of perspective, it obviously was nothing like, a traditional spring game, but I think that if they're going to keep this type of format moving forward, they need to do some things to just kind of make it almost not even necessarily more interactive, but just make it easier to follow for fans that are there and in attendance. Like maybe have, Jim Nagy or someone as like an MC of the event, like, it's like, oh, we're going to this drill now. Like this is, 7-on-7. And over here, we're going to have, one-on-ones. Because it was kind of just like a hodgepodge of a lot of different things going on at the same time. Like you said, it was very much like a regular practice, just kind of half speed from that standpoint. But I think if they want to make this a more fan-centric event, they need to kind of, up the production value of it, so to speak. But yeah, that was kind of my takeaway from the event itself.
How'd you feel about the broadcast and the announcers talking over the entire thing, pretty much?
I mean, they were out there for like the first 45 minutes or whatever. With
they got the first hour, which is what was previously scheduled. It was only going to be an hour an event, so they got that hour.
I mean, I found it interesting that Jim Nagy was on there. I thought he had some interesting comments, especially about the Nico Iamaleava situation at Tennessee, kind of how Oklahoma plans to be aggressive in the spring portal, not just filling out the roster depth wise, but actually trying to add a couple starters if anything becomes available from that standpoint. Brent Venables, I think he answered 2 questions. But still went like 20 minutes because that's kind of what he does when you give him an open-ended question. He just kind of rattles off every position on the roster. But I think there's a way to kind of do what they were doing, but again, just kind of tie everything together and make it a more cohesive and interactive event that's easier to follow from a fan perspective, and for us too. Because like it's one thing when you're trying to pay attention to what Jim Nagy or Brent Venables are saying, and you're also trying to follow different things that are going on the field at the same time. It's just kind of a sensory overload in some aspects.
Yeah, and I mean, pretty much like I said in the post game or the reaction afterwards, I liked what Carson Kent was doing. I thought John Mateer looked really good in his throws. I like Xavier Robinson and Deion Burks. I mean, it's good to see him have that burst back, from what we saw from him in the last spring game, where we really caught on to what he could be, for Oklahoma. And I think he showed a little bit of that again. So those are some of the takeaways I thought from it, just like from the good players that really stood out. Jacoby Johnson, as you said, Josh, had that really good a knockaway in a one-on-one situation on his defensive rep. So that was a good sign to see. I mean, we didn't get to see a lot of the safeties. A lot of them sat out, Peyton Bowen, RSJ. They didn't really get to be out there. So we didn't see that. But I think overall the defensive coverage was pretty decent overall for OU in terms of the 7-on-7, the one-on-one situations throughout the entire event.
Yeah, I will say one of the plays that stood out to me was Torrey Blaylock, that wheel route down the left sideline from Cole Gonzalez, I think it was, when they were doing either 7-on-7 or 11-on-11. You can just see kind of the burst that he has out of the backfield, which is you like to see from a younger player, something to build on there. Josiah Martin did some nice things in the receiving game. When they added him, thought he might kind of just be a depth piece, but given the injury to Giovanni Gibson, and we'll see we'll see how his recovery actually goes, because even if you expect him back by the start of the season, that's probably being a little generous with it. We saw that with Troy Everett last year when he got hurt in the spring. They're like, oh yeah, we hope to have him back by the fall, but that's like you start gearing him back up at the start of the season and maybe get him back like a month later or something like that. So we'll see how that kind of progresses. But I kind of like what I saw from Josiah Martin, just some sparks there. And the freshmen, Manny Choice and Elijah Thomas, I thought they've stood out throughout the spring, especially as newcomers. They just kind of look like they're ready to contribute. And certainly they got some quality reps on Saturday and some throughout the spring too. So we'll see kind of how they continue to progress throughout this offseason and what that looks like come fall.
And Josh, and I think we didn't even mention the interception in the post game. I can't remember who it was. I know Samuel Seago. I think
James Nesta.
Okay, so Sammy tipped it, and then James Nesta came down with it.
And James Nesta made a diving grab.
Yeah, that's a pretty good play for them as well. So just wanted to point that out because I know we probably missed it in our instant reaction type situation.
Sure.
And just from a quarterback standpoint, obviously you guys touched on John Mateer a little bit. Michael Hawkins, I think throughout the spring, he's looked a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more settled in. But, even on Saturday, we saw that he still has those moments where he's trying to throw a fastball when he needs to just put a little bit of touch on a pass. We saw that at times last year where he was just trying to zip it in there. Like, we know he's got some good arm strength, but I think he's still kind of, adjusting and learning, that's going to come when, you're a young player. He's obviously just a sophomore, made a handful of starts, but they've been pleased with his development, and how he's picked up the offense, how John Mateer's kind of helped guide that room, and just how the offensive install has gone, throughout the spring. And a lot of that was because the quarterbacks were so quick to pick it up, in January and February during, OTAs and team meetings and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the event itself, it lent itself to offense. We talked about that a little bit in the instant reaction. You got a chance to see some guys run around and things like that. Defensively, you're not going to learn a whole lot because it's just 7-on-7 and drill. You're not going to get a lot defensively. But yeah, I agree with everything you guys said, man. Yeah, Carson Kent made some nice plays. Good to see Deion Burks run around. John Mateer looked great, as you would hope. He tucked in and ran a couple times, which is, it's fun to see him get out in space a little bit. But yeah, it was set up for offense. The actual event itself, it was whatever. It was whatever. We knew going in it wasn't going to be anything spectacular, and it wasn't. I agree. For some reason, I kind of pictured in my brain that it would be a little more, I don't know why I thought this, foolish in hindsight, I guess, that it would be a little more one at a time. Here's the quarterbacks doing stuff. And it was kind of just like Tom said, kind of just a hodgepodge kind of, I thought for me on the field, kind of just roaming around, it probably was a little better experience than trying to watch from above, probably, I'm guessing. But it was a whatever thing. They said 16,000 people came in there. That's a optimistic number. But even so, that's far less than what you would get in a spring game. Far less, about a third, roughly, of what you would get in a typical spring game. And obviously in Brett Venables' first year, they had over 70,000 in there for a spring game. Now that was obviously a high end, it was special circumstance, but big difference. And it was weird seeing the stadium that empty. And a lot of fans didn't like seeing the stadium that empty, but that's the way it goes with an event like this. And, I thought James made a good point in the instant reaction. If the goal was to not show anything and to not risk anything because the players only going half speed, then that's what happened. There was minimal risk of anyone getting hurt out there. And certainly there was minimal to pick up on if you're another team looking for guys to maybe tamper with or get in the portal, whatever. If that's a risk, there wasn't much to glean from that either. So if that was the primary objective, you did it. If you're hoping to create an entertaining product for people that were actually there, So we'll see if they will be back next year and how they tweak it, if at all, if this is what they do again next year, which I'd imagine they will, as long as the spring portal window is the way that it is.
Yeah, I will say, like, from an attendance standpoint, like, it wasn't something that was exclusive to Oklahoma. If you look at like Alabama, sure. they had a huge
fans
attendance
don't want to
year
see a practice.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, they had huge attendance last year for Kalen DeBoer's first spring game, and then this year, they did something very similar. They had a a-day practice type thing where far fewer fans. I think Florida and Tennessee had their traditional spring games. Florida had a pretty big crowd from what I understand, but a lot of that was also they were celebrating their national championship basketball team during halftime of that too. So it was kind of a combined event. And look, for Oklahoma, like I'm sure if the fans that have families and little kids, I'm sure it was a little bit more worthwhile because you have the
autographs and stuff.
Yeah, the autograph session, the setup for the little kids to participate in, events and inflatables and stuff like that. But if you're just like the, not even the casual fan, but like the fan that wants to know more about what this team is going to look like come the fall and get into the real nitty gritty of the personnel and everything, it's just not worth it for you. I think, if it were me, I would probably not be paying $10 to go sit through that.
I mean, I can't tell you how many fans I heard from that are either season ticket holders or, haven't missed a spring game in 30 years. They didn't go to, obviously look at the numbers, but there was a lot of that there just wasn't a lot of interest. And it was Masters weekend. And, there was a lot of other things kind of going on too, on top of all that. So it is what it is. We'll see what they do next year. The best part of it for us, frankly, was afterward. Brent Venables got to hear from Ben Arbuckle for the first time. Also, Nate Dryland, Wes Goodwin got to hear from a bunch of players. Kind of going off that, I want to, go more macro. Spring camp in general. Obviously, this was the end of spring. Camp is over. What did we learn? We got to hear from Brent Venables again, like I said. Arbuckle for the first time. John Mateer again, which was nice. Third time we've heard from him since he's been obviously here. What were kind of the overarching takeaways over the last month? And this can be big picture or it can be small picture. I do want to kind of close with a big picture question, but for you, what did you feel like you learned about the team over the last month? And I guess your confidence level in the offense, the defense, all that after these practices, these open windows, hearing from guys, all that, in the last month.
Yeah, I think the big story and also just the biggest question going into the offseason or, going into this next season was, can Ben Arbuckle and John Mateer help turn this thing around? And look, until they actually do it in the fall, there's going to be some questions, but all indications right now are that the installation and just how everybody is picking up this offense has gone a lot smoother and has happened at a lot quicker pace, even than Ben Arbuckle thought it might. It's looked good in practices. John Mateer obviously has a very strong command. There's some unproven pieces around him, like the wide receiver room. It's like we've seen what Deion Burks can do when he's healthy at Purdue and early last season. But, he missed most, he only played 5 games last year. They have a lot of unproven pieces there. They have a lot of unproven pieces at tight end. They don't have a clear-cut number one running back who has proven he can be a bell cow type guy because, Gavin Sawchuk's dealt with injuries throughout his career here. Javonte Barnes has dealt with injuries throughout his career here. Xavier Robinson and Taylor Tatum, we only got, small doses of them last year. So there's a lot of unproven pieces around those two main cogs. But from all indications, the offensive line is, miles ahead of where it was last year. It's healthier. It's got better depth, even if it doesn't have as much experience. And look, if the offensive line is a lot better, the offense, just naturally is going to look a lot better than it did last year. So I think that was probably the biggest thing that we learned through spring camp is that, okay, the pieces are there and the installation is going, maybe even better than planned right now. And John Mateer knows this offense well, and he knows he can execute it. And Ben Arbuckle seems to have the juice. So let's see what that looks like come fall.
I mean, the offensive line is exactly where I was going to start with all of this. The offensive line, I have such a better feeling going into it this year than we did last year. I mean, that's just pretty much what it is. When you bring some of the guys that you brought in, And then you have some of your guys that are coming back from injuries that are going to be really, really good for you, on the offensive line and what they can do. And so you feel really good about that. And because I think John Mateer like he stepped right into this role of being the leader of this entire program. Like it's just flawless for him. Like this is exactly the type of atmosphere and environment he needs to be in because he's just comfortable. I mean, he's up there joking with us when we're asking questions. It's that type of situation with him. Like he's just good. And you can sense that when you ask all the other guys about him and just what he is, what he means to them, and what kind of he brings to this team. And so it's a great situation for everyone to be in at this point in time. Even though you have those injuries in the wide receiver room, they still have something to look forward to this time around this season. And I think as far as a bad thing to look at is the kicking situation. I'm not very confident in that situation right now. It looks pretty poor, especially what we saw in the Crimson Combine. Now, are they going to go after something like that in the portal? Is that something that's an option? Because it didn't look really good out there, from the guys that were there. And most of them were Oklahoma native guys, some guys that I covered a lot throughout high school, and they didn't look as good as they did coming up from what I saw. I mean, they looked better when they were being recruited. And so I don't know what's going on with that, but we'll see. I think that's one of the areas I need to focus on too. Is when you go back and look at the numbers of what he's going to look at in the transfer portal in this cycle.
Yeah, I want to preface everything with that. I'm proceeding with caution after what happened last year, and you come in. Nobody thought they were going to win 6 games last year, and so you want to kind of a lot to be proven still. So it's not like you're feeling 100%. This is fixed. It does feel like it's overall in a much better place. Just the team, the program, really all of it compared to a year ago. And you kind of think of, John Mateer and Ben Arbuckle, they just seem to kind of be lock in step, which is very nice. It's been A+ for Mateer, since he came in and so far, and ingratiated himself with the fan base real quick, coming out to basketball games and stuff. And, like I think James kind of alluding to, every time we talk to players over the last few weeks, they just gush about the guy and what he's done on the field and what he's done as from a leader, and he's helping install the offense. It's hard not to feel a lot more optimistic. And really, too, it sounds a little maybe kind of silly right off just because we're coming off the Giovanni Gibson stuff, but they really are pretty healthy overall. I mean, the wide receiver room's banged up, but nothing too substantial outside of Giovanni. And even then, Brent says, maybe by the start of the season, which that's optimistic, but still good to hear that there's, they're not ruling out that he could be a big part of this year's team still. Everywhere else, they're in pretty good shape right now. I mean, you still fall camp in the summer and everything. Things can still happen, but you got through spring pretty healthy. It's hard not to feel like they're just in a much more kind of efficient, like everyone is more, on the same page a little bit, if that makes sense, than maybe a year ago.
The vibes are better.
It feels like it's in a good spot, though. It does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, the vibes are better. I just talking to Troy Everett after Saturday's event. He was talking, we were asking him, was there a moment where it just like felt different than what this was last year? And, given he was injured for most of the spring and a lot, and, pretty much the whole offseason, but he was like, at spring break, I was back home in Roanoke, sitting in my parents' house and, just watching over film. And I just turned to my parents and it's like, man, like, everything just feels so much different with this offense right now. Like guys are having more fun. And, Ben Arbuckle talked about that. It's like celebrating the little wins because the little wins stack up into big wins. So if a guy wins a one-on-one, celebrate that. You throw a touchdown in practice, you see John Mateer running down there and hyping his guys up and just kind of breathing this life into these guys because, a lot of them, probably had their confidence shaken last year with how things went down. It was a disaster. No real way of sugarcoating how bad that offense was. Certainly in stretches last season, the injuries along the offensive line, 8 different lineups, the wide receiver room decimated, running game just, largely inefficient.
Yeah.
Quarterback play, we know what that was. Obviously, offense coordinator getting fired midway through the year and having to switch that up. It was just a all-out disaster. And part of, Ben Arbuckle and John Mateer coming in here, it's not just, installing their offense and trying to bring that production over. It's, building these guys back up into believing that they can execute this offense and be the type of offense that Oklahoma has kind of come to expect for much of the last 20 years. So look, all accounts right now are that things are going well. Again, we'll see how that translates over into the fall when they get there. But, they seem to feel really good. And I thought one of the most telling things after Saturday was, Brent Venables up there talking about this. I think this is going to be our best offensive line since he's been here. And it was funny again talking to Troy Everett. He was like, "Yeah, John Mateer is probably a fan favorite for Bill Bedenbaugh right now because he brought him a roll of Zins." He's got plenty of reason to smile between that and the offensive line kind of being miles ahead of where it was a year ago. And I'm curious to see what that offensive line looks like come fall because we kind of seen who the ones have been throughout this spring. Obviously Troy Everett's going to be a starter at center. Febechi Wiwu's been kind of a mainstay at right guard. Derek Simmons has come over and stepped right into that right tackle spot. Eddie Pierre-Louis been in there at left guard and Jacob Sexton's at left tackle. But you are going to bring back Logan Howland and Heath Ozida in the fall. Those are guys who started 6 and 8 games for you on the left side. We'll kind of see how that shakes out, but they feel a lot better right now about this offensive line than they did a year ago, and I think there's reason for some cautious optimism there.
Mm-hmm. And that's not just you mentioned it with the offense. RSJ is kind of echoing the same thing. Like he sees it. It's more a shutdown defense. What they were feeling, in the fall and spring game camp and things like that. But now he's seeing it. It's more even, and that's working out for them. He says when the offense scores, they all score, and you can see the excitement they have for each other for what they're building. And so that's a really good sign. I mean, you have two different players announcing that publicly, and you have Ben Arbuckle coming in, and he's very confident. John Mateer is very confident. So it's just a better offensive scheme all around. I think it's going to work out for him.
Yeah, it's fair to be excited. You're proceeding with caution after what happened, but it's fair to be excited. Ben Arbuckle is a guy who feels like a rising star, and John Mateer, like we said, John Mateer. It all starts at quarterback, and he's been an A+ so far. I mean, you got to do it in games. We need to the season, but he's been everything you could have hoped he would be so far from a leadership, helping install the offense, and his play. I mean, he's making plays in practice. He looks the part. He looks like quarterback one, and you compare it to what we were hearing last year in spring camp and certainly into the fall, where it was the offense is turning it over a lot, and there are a lot of negative plays, and it hasn't sounded like that this time. It's been a lot more of a give and take. And, the defense is still going to be really good. You're replacing big pieces, but I have very little concern about the defense overall. They're probably going to add another piece or two in the portal here coming up. But the defense is going to be really good. You definitely want to shore up the special teams like James was referring to earlier. But the offense is going to be far better. And look, Brent Venables has brought up the stat every chance he gets that the 3 teams that were top 50 in efficiency on defense and special teams on both were Notre Dame, Ohio State, and OU. And those teams played for the national title. OU was bad because their offense stunk. So, again, it's a stat. You can kind of find any way to bend things however you want. But there is merit to the fact that if the offense can just be a little more serviceable, it's reasonable to think that they can win, a few more games than they did last year. So it's fair to be excited. It feels like it's moving in the right direction. You got to keep it going. You have the whole fall and obviously the summer to maybe try to add some portal guys here, but it's fair to be excited. I think that's reasonable right now.
Yeah. And I want to say one more thing on John Mateer. And I don't want to make this too big of a thing because I don't think it makes or breaks whether a quarterback can be good. But, just how comfortable he is, in front of a camera, in front of a microphone. And I think that confidence that he kind of exudes obviously kind of, permeates through the rest of the team. You look back, last year, Jackson Arnold was – you could tell he wasn't quite comfortable being in that role yet. Michael Hawkins, just as a freshman, was a little bit quieter. But, John Mateer is a guy who's, he's been through this before. He was a starter last year. He's been in this offense. He's very confident in what him and Ben Arbuckle can do together and what he thinks he can, bring to this offense. Just hearing him talk, I know a lot of people have kind of compared it to, Baker Mayfield and, when he was here. Obviously that was a little bit before my time here, but, he just has kind of this cool confidence that, even we heard from Dylan Gabriel 2 years ago. It's just a guy who feels in control of this offense and that he knows that, he can be the guy to lead them.
Yeah, I hate doing it because it is so low hanging fruit and everyone does it, but there are similarities even down to the headband in the post game.
The headband
exact outfit a few times. Like it's we talked about it. OU, you don't want to. It's such a ridiculously high bar, but it's like they kind of need Ben Arbuckle and John Mateer to be this version of Lincoln Riley and Baker Mayfield. And they have to do it in games. So I'm not saying they are, but I mean. The spring went from that perspective about as well as you could have hoped. It sounds like it all went very smoothly, and they have the guys, and I think the fans are going to be cautious, but I think the guys on the team believe that it's going to be different this time, and that's a big part of it. You got to get the guys believing, and they have some leadership on offense that I don't know if they had last year. It feels like between Mateer, certainly Troy Everett has become that. Maybe even Deion Burks a little bit. Like they have some guys that can be leaned on offensively from a leadership standpoint. I think that was vacant last year, so that helps. I mean, Everett was hurt obviously a lot last year in the offseason, so that helps. But good spring. A lot more coverage to come over the course of the summer. Obviously, the portal's about to open on Wednesday, so we'll have a lot to get into there. As some guys will hop in, some guys will be added. It's not as busy as the winter portal, certainly, but there will be movement, and so we'll be sure to have a lot of coverage there over the next few weeks or so into the summer. Be media days, all that stuff before you know it. So, but a good spring, I think, for Oklahoma, and a productive one for us and everyone to kind of get an idea of what this team's going to look like. Next year, and obviously a make or break year for Brent Venables and everyone around that program right now. Should we do a little bit of basketball before we let Tom go? And James and I will wrap up with some Diamond Sports. Last week we kind of got into some off-season stuff a little bit with hoops. We talked about their first portal edition and Tay Davis from Notre Dame. Later that day on Monday, they made a really big splash with Nijel Pack from Miami. OU fans might remember him from Kansas State before. This was a substantial get, Tom. This is a guy that OU would not have gotten before. I mean, to put it, simply, expensive. Trey Young, the assistant GM, we talked about that a little bit last week. He was a big part of this, getting Nijel aboard. This is a legit pickup. He will start for this Oklahoma team next year. Kind of, paint the picture a little bit. I know you had an analysis piece of kind of what OU's getting here. I mean, this feels like a substantial ad for Oklahoma going into next year. And it's only two guys with him and Tay Davis, but it feels like this Porter class is already quite different than what, Porter's had before his last couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, look, if Tay Davis was your kind of 1-for-1 replacement for Jalen Moore, Nijel Pack is your Jeremiah Fears fill-in. And look, they have different playing styles. Nijel Pack is more of a score first type guy. And look, Jeremiah Fears could fill up the stat sheet scoring, but Nijel Pack is more of a shooter. I think he's like a 40% career 3-point shooter. So he's really good from there, both off the dribble and off the catch. He's a little bit more of a combo guard. He's smaller though. He's kind of a shooting guard in a point guard's body. He's only 6'1". Jeremiah Fears was 6'5". So he doesn't quite have that length, but he's a pretty efficient scorer. He missed most of last season with a foot ankle injury. So if you can get him back to where he was before that injury, I think it's a huge pickup for Oklahoma. Just because even as good as Jeremiah Fears was last season and as good as he's going to be in the NBA, he's going to be a lottery pick. He was still inexperienced coming in last year. And you had to kind of go through the growing pains with him, some of the turnover struggles, some of the slumps. But in Nijel Pack, you have a veteran guy who has been the starting point guard on a Final Four team. It's not easy to get Final Four experience onto your roster. And Oklahoma has done that. And we've talked about before in the past where, Porter Moser has, tried to bring in guys who have postseason experience. We saw that a little bit this last cycle. They brought in Milwaukee, Jalen Jones, Kobe Elvis. Yeah. Those guys had been in the NCAA tournament, whereas the year before, nobody on that roster had NCAA tournament experience. But now you're getting a bunch of it because Nijel Pack has been there and done that. He was the most outstanding player in the Midwest Regional the year that Miami went to the Final Four a couple of years back. So I think it's a huge pickup just from a veteran leadership standpoint. You still, I think, need a off-ball shooter to help fill out that backcourt. And we'll see kind of how things shake out. But I think between Nijel Pack and Tay Davis, you have two starters there. I'm curious, are you going to start Jeff Wanko and Jadon Jones together? Because I think that is a feasible thing, because both those guys are kind of trending toward either being starters or, certainly, 6 men type players last year. I think you still need to come in and, probably grab another big guy, but you feel real good about this roster right now between what you are bringing back and the 2 kind of centerpiece transfers that you've landed so far.
For sure. I mean, even beyond the player, because he's a good player. We did, Tom just talked about that. This is a guy who, you're looking at as one of your top scoring options next year. It just, I think if you're an OU fan, you're just excited to see some kind of commitment and investment in winning. We talked about it last week with, Trae Young coming aboard as the assistant GM, and that seemed like a pretty exciting thing of like OU getting invested in basketball and really like, trying to win at a high level. Because again, that's been a conversation. Does OU care enough about basketball to put the resources into it to win at the level needed? Porter Moses talks about that all the time. The resources not being what they need to be in NIL and all that. To get a player like this took some doing, and so just even beyond, again, what he's going to actually give you as a player, it's just kind of exciting to see OU like, okay, they're in on big players in the portal, and they're making a run at trying to be a really good team. And you kind of feel like between this, pickup here with Pack, Tay Davis, talk about, like you just said, Wanko, Jadon Jones, you got Milwaukee back, Dayton Forsythe is back. You got a little team here, and you're going to add more. You still have, 5 spots, I think, to play around with. So they're going to add more, but you've got a little bit of a team right now that is worth getting excited about, and you got to keep adding to it. We'll see how it all shakes out when we get to November, but I think it's fair. I was saying the same thing earlier. Fair to be excited. I think it's fair to be excited about this basketball team right now. This portal class so far is really strong with Pack and Tay Davis. So exciting, and a big pickup here. That I think whenever it came through, it was really like, whoa, that's a power move that Oklahoma just simply was not able to make before. So it's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, they've essentially added 2 top 50 portal players.
Yeah,
I think 2 of the 3 highest rated portal additions that they've had under Porter Moser. I think Javion McCollum was the only one that was a little bit higher, and he obviously led the team in scoring that year, even though wasn't super flashy, but was a guy who could go out there and get some buckets for you for that one season before he went to Georgia Tech. But to kind of put it in a little bit more perspective, like not only are they 2 top 50 players who certainly were not cheap to get. But these are 2 guys who were starters at high major programs.
Right.
As far as I can remember. Yeah, as far as I can remember, the only other like high major starting player that Oklahoma has added during Porter Moser's tenure was Rivaldo Suarez, and he started at Oregon the year before. Jalen Moore was a rotational piece at Georgia Tech.
Hughley at Pitt.
Yeah, Hughley at Pitt. Milwaukee, started a handful of games at Alabama, but was mostly a bench guy for them. So you're going out there and you're adding guys who have gone out there and put up numbers in a starting role for programs in the ACC. Like that's good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And we touched on it briefly last week too, but actually having some retention is just nice. I mean, look, you're still playing a lot. Don't get me wrong. From
a production standpoint, you're not bringing back a lot, but just from a guys who have
some guys, it's not a complete start over, which is something, and maybe that's a testament again to the commitment to resources and all that, and maybe guys feel like it's moving in the right direction. Who knows what the reason is, but you have Forsythe coming back, and Wanko and Jones and Wagi, like you have some stability really for the first time. Now you're replacing it, and making an assistant coach change again with Armand Gates moving on, but you have a little continuity. It's certainly the most that they've had under Porter. It's basically been a total start over every year, and it's still replacing a lot, don't get me wrong, but it's better than it's been. So you have that with these 2 guys, and you're off to a good start. It's been a good start to the offseason for Porter, and reason to be optimistic right now, I think, with the way that that team and program's kind of trending. And the Trae Young effect already. I think both these guys are guys that I don't know if they get without Trae Young, and with especially Nijel Pack.
I think Trae
substantial.
I think Trae was on a podcast. I think it might have been with Chris Haynes a few days ago. Where he was like, I'm trying to help them build this. Like we got a couple guys already. Like I want to add more. I want to be the guy that helps lead this program, into kind of being more competitive and be more consistently in the NCAA tournament picture. So we'll see how that works out. Obviously it's a good start. Not just in, what they've added in Trae Young from a, personnel perspective, but his investment financially in the program has helped. They're not going to have a $10 million roster like that report the other day. There's going to be like a dozen or so teams that have that kind of payroll on their roster, but it's going to be a lot more competitive financially than this team was last year. And that goes a long way.
Trae Young quickly vaulting up, beloved former Sooners very, very fast. The current team for kind of, obviously it's a little different because he, played high school ball in Norman, but considering he was a one and done player at OU, he has been very, committed coming back around the program. He comes to football games all the time. And now this, obviously is the biggest thing. Trae Young Arena probably is potentially down the road because this guy has been as good of a former alumni to his respective sport as any at OU in any sport. Big time stuff.
It's basically him and Blake because obviously Blake, helped invest in that performance center that they have right next to the LNC. He's a guy that comes back around too, but Trae, obviously in his assistant GM role now and the $1 million investment that he made toward the program, but also he comes around the program every preseason to kind of work on his game a little bit and also like just kind of imbue some confidence and some advice on the guys that are coming up.
Probably can go ahead and, I only played 1 year, but you got to put Trae Young's jersey in the rafters if you want. Buddy Hield first, though. That's way overdue. I can't believe Buddy's not up there.
I didn't even notice that Buddy's wasn't up. I didn't even notice this wasn't up there. That's wild, too.
Way overdue. I don't know what the holdup is. It's his time from the time that Blake Griffin's OU career ended to when his jersey got retired. I was in school at OU when they did it. It's been longer since Buddy finished. So he's overdue. Now, you got to make it line up with the schedules. He's an active NBA player, so they probably want him. Obviously, want him there, and so that might be part of it. But he's due. He's due for that. And then
maybe try to do that during next All-Star break. Have it kind of line up with the 10-year anniversary of that Final Four run.
That'd be cool. Maybe that's what they're waiting for. That could be possible. But the 24 for Buddy should be up there, and then Trae Young can be shortly thereafter.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I think that's it for that part of it. We'll let Tom hop out. James and I will wrap up a little bit of Diamond Sports stuff on the back end. Tom, good spring camp. I'm not sure when we'll see you in person again. This is where we kind of go on we're just communicating through podcasts and phone calls, but we'll see you here down the road before too long, I'm sure.
All right, catch y'all later.
See you.
All right, we now shifting to the Diamond Sports portion of the program. James covers softball. I cover baseball. Softball, this is weird. James, we'll start with them. They split the first two with Alabama and Tuscaloosa. Game 3 is tonight. Just a bizarre Saturday through Monday series, which I guess the SEC does. That's a thing that they do. In baseball, they go Thursday, Saturday sometimes. So you had that last week on the baseball side with LSU. So the series is not over. We very rarely, if ever, talk about series in the middle of them because the series are always over. But they rallied to win on Saturday night. They lost yesterday, rubber match tonight. So obviously, no grand takeaways yet because the series isn't over. But from the first two games, I guess some quick thoughts from you and going into the game tonight.
It's just Alabama's pitchers, Jocelyn Brisky, just had an amazing outing just this past yesterday. So that's pretty much what it was. She shut down OU's offense. Outside of Cassidy Pickering, hitting her double in the third inning and getting, extending her 16-game hitting streak, which is wild to say. There just wasn't much offense for OU. And in fact, they didn't get another hit until Sydney Barker hit her home run in the seventh inning, it was a 1 out in seventh inning. And so that just kind of, only thing that did was got OU away from being shut out for the first time since 2019. That's all it was. It wasn't anything else because Jocelyn just had that much control over her pitching and over OU's hitters. That's what it was. So they really have to bounce back from that. Now I know Jocelyn, she pitched a little bit on Saturday as well. So let's see what Alabama who they throw out there to try to take the series from OU, and as OU tries to take series back from Alabama. Let's see what happens. But really, it's just a wait and see at this point in time. It's just a wait and see because It happens like that sometimes. It's only 4 games that they've lost this season. And I know it's brutal, but I believe they lost 6 or 7 last year. I can't remember which one it was. Last year they lost 6 or 7 games. So the standard's high at OU. That's what it is. So I don't think you should be any downers just yet. They lost 2 series last year. They've only lost 1 this year. I think they can still win this one if they come out and play the way they're supposed to play, and they'll be fine.
Yeah, big game tonight. Obviously a chance to win a series on the road against a good team, good program. So we'll see what happens. I mean, the game on Saturday, they're down, and it's just that inevitability that they, rallied to win. Not able to do it yesterday after they fell in too big of a hole, but big chance to get a series win on the road tonight. We'll see how it goes. James will have the coverage over at Sooners Illustrated. And then they're back home next weekend for Mississippi State. No midweek game with the Monday series and all that. So they'll have some time off after this game tonight. And then Mississippi State coming up back in Norman next weekend. But, right now, Oklahoma, you're in certainly good position. The goal is just to be in the top 8 when it's done. Make sure you get regional at home and super regional at home to get you to Oklahoma City. That's the goal. And, I don't think a loss tonight is, going to hurt you too much, but a win would help you a lot. I mean, that's a big series win on the road. So big game tonight, and James will have the coverage. And, of course, we'll wrap up that and Mississippi State weekend on the show certainly next Monday.
I guess we should shout out Maya Bland for her clutch hit on Saturday too. To actually,
on Saturday.
To actually do that. So just wanted to shout her out because it was 2 back-to-back games for her hitting a home run. It's only 3 home runs for her on the year, and they're in back-to-back games. 2 of them are in back-to-back games. So that's a pretty good scenario for her.
Yeah, it's funny because we're at the Crimson Combine, and we're wrapping up doing post game and stuff, and they fell behind, and it was 1-0 going to the 7th, and it was like, man, they might lose the opener, and then sure enough, bomb,
pinch hit comes in.
It's like that, just the figures, and then also Bama got it back yesterday, but they have that ability to just be in game until it's over. You kind of always feel like, even yesterday it was 6-0 in the 7th. You're kind of like, they might go crazy, or you never know. It's how it goes for them. But
they come back in so many games. I think it's been about a dozen or so games that they come back in already.
Crazy.
This year to win. So, they're never out of it. So they're out of it.
Never out of it. So no doubt. So big game tonight, and then Mississippi State at home next weekend back at Love's Field. As for baseball, pretty good weekend. They got 2 from Vanderbilt. So you wanted to win the series. That was the key. Had a chance to go for the sweep yesterday and got run ruled on Sunday. So not a great way to end the weekend, but still a good weekend overall to get a series win over a good Vandy team, a top 20 team. Now we went into the week saying, could you get 3, from Dallas Baptist and Vanderbilt? They split it 2-2. Not bad. And the winning the weekend series was huge. So you're feeling pretty good about that. They moved up 1 spot in the rankings up to 18. Big week ahead. They go to Oklahoma State tomorrow night for Bedlam. And then they go to Columbia to play Missouri, who's, the bottom end of the SEC. Missouri's having a rough year. So that's a big opportunity on the road. But as for this past weekend, I mean, going into the week, it was all about, can they get the offense going? They only scored 4 runs against LSU in that whole series last weekend. They scored 4 in the first inning on Friday against Vandy. So it was like, all right, they already matched it. So they got the bats going. That was the key. They scored 9. Cade Crossland was excellent on Friday. Kyson Witherspoon had a back thing, so they bumped his start back a day. And Cade Crossland stepped right up into that Friday role and was awesome. And they won that game 9-4. And then on Saturday, Kyson Witherspoon, complete game shutout. So obviously he's fine. He's feeling good. He is so good. SEC pitcher of the week again. He's phenomenal. He's just enjoy him while he's here. He is special. And he was great on Saturday. They scored 14 runs in that game to run rule Vanderbilt. It was also a program record crowd, over 5,000 people. I don't even know, truthfully, I've been to a lot of games there and games that were packed. I don't know how you get 5,000 people in there. I wasn't able to be there on Saturday because we had football stuff.
We were football. Long. Yeah.
I don't know how you physically get that many people in there because I've been there when it's been packed, and it's like, high 3s or low 4,000s. Over 5,000 people in Eldo Metro Park must have been like sardines in there. So, but I mean, shout out to OU fans coming out there. That's awesome. Single game attendance record, and they rewarded them with a 14-0 blowout win. It was pretty cool. It was really warm, great weather. On Saturday. Again, stinks you couldn't finish the sweep on Sunday, but, the name of the game of the SEC is to win series, and that's what they did. And, go to a break tomorrow. I'll be there in Stillwater on Tuesday night. Looking forward to it. And then Columbia, I'm not going to say you need to sweep Missouri, because sweeping anyone in the SEC is tough, especially on the road. But you want to get 2 there. I mean, they're just a bottom end team in the SEC. That's a series on the road you want to win. If you can win that series, you'll be back at 500, 9-9 in SEC play if you get 2, going into kind of the stretch run. So big week ahead. Oklahoma State's also not playing great baseball. They're below 500 on the year, but it's still going to be tough because it's Bedlam. But a chance, I think, if you can go get 3 wins this week, I think you're feeling pretty good about it. Before obviously returning home next week for Oral Roberts next Tuesday. So reason to be encouraged, I think, overall. The offense got going, and if Cade Carlson can pitch anything even close to like that to go with Kyson Witherspoon, that's a pretty good little 1-2 punch. So some signs for optimism and confidence, I think, coming out of this weekend against Vanderbilt, even though Sunday didn't go, as you'd like.
I just think it's awesome that they were able to perform that way in front of that crowd. You
don't want to let the crowd down.
Yeah, you reward the fans for coming out, and that's going to bolster some support for you later on in the season. So I guess they got the Crimson Combine crowd kind of just like
probably
traveled
helps.
over,
definitely helps.
Yeah, and watch the game. And so just to perform that way is a really big boost. And I think they had a good time. I mean, obviously we weren't there, but that's playing in front of a crowd like that. It's got to be fun. It's got to be fun. So
for sure.
That's pretty cool.
We've seen, we talk about this with basketball sometimes. When it's like they have the biggest, most packed out crowds when they've taken some of their toughest losses. It's like you want to reward those big crowds. And they more than did that. They put together their best game of the year. I mean, Kyson Witherspoon goes complete game shutout, 2 hits, 11 Ks. And, 6 Ks, excuse me. Malachi had 11 Ks on Sunday, 6 Ks, no walks. And you score 14 runs, and Easton Carmichael had 5. I mean, it was just a complete domination of a game on Saturday. So that is pretty cool to see in front of the big crowd for sure. And a good series win, like we said. And like I said, I'll be in Stillwater tomorrow night at O'Brate. I love going out to O'Brate Stadium, and it'll be a fun Bedlam game tomorrow night in Stillwater. Just keep up with Sooners Illustrated. I'll have all the coverage there, and then the team will head up to Columbia. That's a Thursday to Saturday series. Missouri and OU, they typically don't play on Easter, and that's why. So they'll play Thursday to Saturday this week in Columbia, so keep an eye out for that. So 4 games in 5 days coming up for Oklahoma. Kind of test your bullpen a little bit, so we'll see how they handle it on the road this week in Stillwater and Columbia. I think that's it. We'll be back with Colin later this week. It was a big recruiting weekend. Lots of guys were in town for the Combine, so we'll wrap all that up with Colin. And the portal will also have just opened, so I'm sure we'll probably already have some portal stuff to get into as well. So keep an eye out for that. Going to shoot for Thursday on the show there. Keep an eye out for that. Thursday afternoon. James, Tom, myself will be back next Monday to wrap up the weekends for the Diamond Sports, the early portal movement, anything else to talk about on the hoop side. That'll all be on the show, of course, next Monday. So keep an eye out for that. Sooners Illustrated, lots of coverage over there coming out of spring camp. More to come. And obviously, again, Diamond Sports, basketball, all that. We got it all for you at oklahoma.247sports.com. For Tom Green earlier, James D. Jackson, I'm Josh Callaway signing off. We'll see you next time right back here on the Sooners Illustrated podcast.
See you.